Panel discussion of the 2024 Consultants Survey. For those who don't know, I'm Alfredo. I am the COO and the co-founder of Prosal. And if you are new to our community, Prosal is a platform and a business development community that makes it easy for agencies and consultants of all backgrounds and sizes to find and win new clients from requests for proposals, also known as RFPs. Prosal is the only online platform that vets and shares high quality RFPs and provides you with the resources and educational opportunities like this panel to win those opportunities. Before Prosal, I was in the same place as many of y'all. I was the founder and president of a digital communications agency, and we grew to a team of just about a dozen. And in launching Prosal and getting to know so many of you, one thing has stood out that probably will not come as a surprise to anyone. Business development is tough and not always easy to get a return on, whether that return is a hard win or a soft win, like an interview, feedback, or even a new connection. And I get it, right? Like I felt this when I was applying to my first few and even my last few RFPs and clients, and even after winning several of them, it was still really intimidating to apply and follow up and ask for feedback, especially when I didn't get the response that I wanted or when I wanted it. So in hearing all these requests, we have put together, and to help you improve your ability to compete, these events are a response to that. And when Prosal began, this is really interesting to reflect on. When Prosal began, just as an idea, there was almost no research on the consulting sector, especially for as it related to small businesses and entrepreneurial solo consultants and nonprofit consultants. And for the second year in a row, I'm so happy to announce that in partnership with Consultants for Good, the Catalyst community, and Tufts University, Prosal has published the 2024 Consultants Survey, a survey of nearly 500 respondents about their consulting practices, company performance in 2023, business development trends, and other insights that folks like you would find helpful in learning more about the sector and improving your own offerings. The report is free and available to download if you haven't already. I'm just dropping it in the chat for all of you all to see. And today's very exciting panel, we're going to be joined by two esteemed guests and consultant leaders and partners of Prosal to talk about the report and its findings. So I'm very thrilled and happy to introduce Lauren Andraski, who is the founder of Consultants for Good, and Kamilah Martin, who is the founder of Catalyst Consulting in the Catalyst community. A little bit about them. Consultants for Good is the world's largest community of nonprofit consultants that believes you can do good while you do well for yourself. Consultants for Good, or C4G, as it is affectionately called, invites consultants at any stage of their career to be supported by resources, events, client leads, and a private forum to ask anything keeping you up at night in your business. If you aren't yet a member of Consultants for Good, you can start your free trial with the link that I'm going to drop in the chat. And you can join their membership for the cost of less than one billable hour per month to support your thriving consulting business. And also in the room, and as part of one of our esteemed guests, we have Kamilah Martin, and a little bit about Catalyst community. Catalyst is a private membership community for Black women and women of color nonprofit consultants and coaches. Catalyst centers the needs and the safety of Black women and women of color independent nonprofit consultants. And today they are celebrating their 2-year impact survey, and they are offering an extended membership trial of 30 days. Usually it's 7, but right now it's 30. So if you haven't already and you want to learn more about it, you can also sign up at the link that I'm sharing right now. And so this is a smaller group than we usually have. I love to see it, and that's by no means a bad thing. It's actually a wonderful thing. So usually we'll save our questions for the end, but because of the size of the group, please feel free to share your questions in the chat whenever it comes up. I'm going to be asking a few questions to Lauren and to Kamilah about the report and about their experiences working with their communities and with different consultants. But we also want to hear from you. And if you also have to drop early, do not worry. This session is being recorded, and we'll share the recording of the session along with all of the resources and links that we come across in an email to you tomorrow. So without further ado, on to the main event. Please give a warm welcome to Lauren and Kamilah. Lauren and Kamilah, welcome.
Thanks, Alfredo.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Awesome. We're very excited to have you. I'm very excited to be talking with you all. I want to just jump right into it. So I know you all had a hand in reviewing the report, not once, but multiple times. Lauren, I remember looking through your comments and they were invaluable as we were really digging into the materials and before we published it. And I wanted to just start off with a general reflection for the both of you. And Lauren, I'll start with you. What were your main takeaways and your thoughts on the 2024 consultant report?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so exciting to actually have more data on the nonprofit consultant sector. I think it really, like when I started consulting 6, 7 years ago, there wasn't a lot of this. And so being able to see in some ways some of the things that have felt true for a while, but there just wasn't good data on. And then other things that say, oh, okay, my experience or the experience I'm hearing are actually not all that universal. That just might be the things that I'm hearing. So a couple of things that I like to see was um, overall job satisfaction with consulting was quite high. That's awesome. And it should be because, you've decided not to have a normal job and you're doing your own thing and you get to kind of create your own job. So I thought that was really exciting to see, especially just given what we saw in the survey. I think about 70% of respondents work with nonprofits, and that's mostly who we work with is the nonprofit consultant. So that was exciting to see. Unsurprising kind of low satisfaction with RFPs. So I know we'll dig into that a little bit more. And then I think, again, pay disparities mostly aligned with what we'd expect by identity. So would love to talk to and with this group to see recommendations for how we can affect that with nonprofit consultants specifically.
Yeah, I think we definitely have a few pieces that we're going to touch on all those things, especially as it relates to RPs, because that's the center of Prosal's business. So really excited to hear from folks about what they all think as well and how it relates to them. Kamilah, what about you? What are the things that you found really interesting in the survey?
I would say the first thing that I love to see was the sample size. I think, it was higher than even last year, but I think it just shows the interest in sort of sharing this kind of information and learning more about this information, and the fact that we're out here. Consultants are out here and the numbers are increasing, and I don't foresee that going anywhere just with the trends that I've been kind of noticing in my anecdotal bubble over the last couple of years. So, I was very happy to be able to feel that the data was strong, that you all received, because my kind of interest is in the niche of kind of Black women and other women of color consultants. I was, of course, combing the data to be able to understand and see what our reality is compared to others' reality. And I can't say that I was surprised with the figure that we that those two groups in particular have seen lower revenue than some other identities. And I think, again, we're going to perhaps dig into that a little bit as to why and systemic stuff and, how we can overcome that. But that was, of course, the lens from which I was looking through most of it. I also appreciated the breakout of which fields were basically getting more revenue, and I'm not surprised that it was the technology fields, the website development, that sort of things, those sorts of things that were bringing in higher bids, than a lot of the others, which is interesting in the nonprofit space because there aren't as many of those kinds of opportunities that I think a lot of us are going after. So I think that in and of itself creates perhaps an equity divide. So those are the two pieces that I think stood out to me most immediately.
Well, and snaps really to the consulting community for being responsive to the survey, and to the Tufts University who we partnered with on this. So last year I think we surveyed 160, 170, give or take. And then we wanted to kind of double it. And we set a target of 300 people. So when we got to 500, it was like, wow, like this is insane. Not just, props to the folks that were actually leading the survey, but to the people responding to the survey and being receptive and willing to share their experiences and what they wanted to see reflected in the data. So
I mean, that's probably a general nod to partnerships, right? Like that we can probably even apply to ourselves as consultants, just, those sorts of impacts, when you sort of expand the reach of your audience to partner with other audiences that might have more access to things.
Of course, right. Well, I mean, and this webinar is just a direct result of that. You brought up the pay disparities for BIPOC and women-owned businesses, and I want to talk about that because this is the second time that we find with a pretty regular discrepancy in terms of women and BIPOC-owned businesses earning less. I think last year we saw was something like 20% for women-owned businesses and 60% for BIPOC-owned businesses, and then below the average. And then this year we saw something similar, even when we adjusted for the median, rather than looking at the mean. But one thing that we did this year is that we actually added the question of whether or not someone had certifications as to whether or not they were a woman-owned small business or an 8A or a socially and economically disadvantaged business. And when we added that layer, that actually had them earning above the average. And so I want to ask you about that, and especially as it relates to you brought up the systemic inequalities. How should a consultant, particularly a Black or a Latino or a woman entrepreneur, how should they read this data and interpret it so that they can be a better entrepreneur and a better business owner?
I mean, I think we'd have to define better, right? I think some folks have that sort of revenue North Star as what they're going after, and that might, identify and signify that they're more successful. Honestly, and again, this is anecdotal just from the community that I serve, a lot of women that are in my network, quite frankly, aren't interested in that grind and hustle. So you have to ask yourself, what's the reason, right, that some are getting certifications and some aren't? The process of certifications in and of itself is a tremendous hoops to jump through. And I would love to just anybody in the comments that's been through the certifications process, if you were a minority-owned business, woman-owned business, to share, raise your hand or whatever and share some of those experiences as well. But I think, in one way for me, it feels a little sad that in order for us to kind of meet the bar, that we have to have some set aside, earmarked funding for us to be able to compete within. So there's that. But personally, like I have not gone that route just because I don't necessarily want all that comes along with it, even if it does mean higher revenue. So I think there's so many underlying questions to that and underlying root causes, I guess, to really think about in terms of that disparity. Now, I think, there's a clear answer. If you're trying to reach higher revenue and you identify as one of those marginalized groups, then the data is showing that's one way to kind of get your leg up pretty quickly, right? Because there are pools of funds that are identified specifically for women and minority-owned businesses. Like, it just is what it is. But how do you circumvent that if that's not what you're interested in? I think that's a root cause question that I think kind of has to make a lot of us kind of scratch our heads, right? Like, is that something I really want to strive for? And how can I be competitive without having to go that route? So that's how I'll respond to that one. I don't know if that answered your question or if it gave more questions, but that's just sort of my reaction, to that trend in general.
I think it shows that we can definitely have a whole discussion just about this. And Beth, who shared in the chat, so she says that she looked at certifications and saw that the process was just too arduous to even go through and that it wasn't worth it. And I mean, this is something that anecdotally I've heard from folks as well, who want to go actually through a certification, but you have to compile all these documents. You have to write a narrative. Now you actually, for the 8A, you have to write a narrative that explains why how have you been disenfranchised. And there's even like a cottage industry that's popped up where folks are charging thousands of dollars to help you go through these certifications that you may not even hear back from for months. So I think you bring up two very important points, right? Like, what are you optimizing for in your business? Is that the better business that you want? And then the second piece is that there still is more work involved for you to even think about getting at the same playing fields. And that's just given today's landscape. So that I think you do bring up some good points. And I want to move on to another piece of the data that Lauren actually called out, where we actually had a bit of a disconnect with another finding. Our survey found, Lauren, you brought up that LGBTQ businesses in our survey reported higher than average revenue with no effect on certification. But you saw something separate in Rebecca and Druska's annual survey on nonprofit consultants. And I want you to elaborate on that if you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just really demonstrates that we need to keep doing this research. There just hasn't been a lot of surveys for nonprofit consultants specifically. And so seeing some oppositional results in some ways, because in her study, I think it was that queer folks tend to make less overall in revenue, whereas this had the opposite. And so just doing more of that data, more surveys to see what's happening. Kamilah, also what you were saying brought up a question that I have about the data too, which is, did we also look at how pay correlated to working hours there? Like, do we actually just see more folks, like more not white men folks, opting out of more of the hustle culture of working tons of hours and therefore making more money too? Or is it actually a rate disparity in some ways?
So we didn't
I
see
don't know if
anything
you
on
know that.
hours, just because
Okay.
the hours were most of the folks, like there were a lot of solo consultants, but not enough for us to see that data. And
Okay.
the data was at the company level, right? So that might not count like the contractors that you hired for work or part-time employees. There were kind of pretty self-evident findings, right? Like the more employees you have, the more money you make. There's, I think, probably a reverse causal relationship there. The more RFP or the bigger you are, the more likely you are to win an RFP. That comes into overhead. But and then the ones that were interesting were around, Kamilah, what you brought up earlier, area of expertise and service offerings where technical expertise really dominated the higher revenue expectation and performance. Web development, software development, IT, and finance, financial services were at the top end, and then like event planning and diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice services were at the lower end of just that spectrum. And then client types, which is one thing that I actually wanted to also ask both of you, really, because both of you very much cater to nonprofit consultants and serve the nonprofit consultant community, where when we ask what client type you serve, a lot of folks work with government, municipal government, the federal government, with private companies, publicly traded companies, small businesses. And when you line them all up on a spectrum, nonprofits were second to last above foreign entities. And I want to ask about that for you all, where is this an element of self-selection, or does this speak to the community that these consultants serve, that nonprofits generally have, say, less budget availability and less project availability than say a publicly traded company or Uncle Sam?
So what's the question in that?
Is this an issue of, if it is an issue at all, right? Is this as it relates to the revenue made by nonprofit consultants? Is that emerging from what the consultants are charging, the services that they're offering? Is this emerging from the budgets and the general project availability from the clients themselves?
I would posture probably both. I don't know for sure, but I can say, of course, anecdotally, if there are larger government entities that are working with multi-million-dollar budgets, it would make sense that those that are going after those are going to have the higher revenue, right? So, I mean, I would say that like the nonprofits that I work with, again, have shied away from those larger government contracts for the reason of the certification. And hopefully we can get back to Beth's question here in the comments, but I think that's an internal question that the business has to decide. Is that a market we're going to go into and tap into, and what needs to happen? And again, that's going to get you higher revenue. Like it just is. If you're working in corporate with the higher budgets, if you're working in government with the higher budgets, it'll get you the higher revenue. It'll get you a lot more hoops that you have to jump through, and bureaucracy that you have to deal with. And that's for you to decide whether or not you want to do that. And actually, I'll just tap on Beth's question here. I think the direction of the causation, from what I've seen, the ones in my community who have gotten the certifications are solopreneurs, and the way that they've circumnavigated the arduousness of the process is they've tapped into their local small business development agencies within their cities, who offer support with the actual kind of going through the process, a lot of them pro bono. So if that is a direction you want to go in, there are resources to kind of support that, for those who are solopreneurs and, don't have the larger staff and that sort of thing to manage it. I keep feeling like I don't know if I'm answering your questions, Alfredo, but I think the question is whether that's a market that you want to tap into or not, quite frankly. And if you do, then there's potentially a lot more revenue, higher revenue opportunities there for you to go after.
I know we talked about this. I actually wanted to save this for the end, but I think the conversation is being brought up right now. There's two really questions that I have here. And I guess the first one that I'm going to ask this to Lauren. I think I'll start with you. But I also want to ask this to the audience, right? Question being, are you selling out as an impact-focused consultant? Because really, nonprofit community is focused on impact. Do you selling out on the as an impact-focused consultant if you work outside of the nonprofit or philanthropy sector?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, I think, I'll speak for myself coming from the nonprofit sector with our kind of tricky mindsets with money. I think it can feel like that, like you've got to work for nonprofits only. And I think that that's not necessarily true. Like, I don't think there's one coach that I used to work with, and they called themselves anti-capitalist business coaches. And part of their approach was like, okay, I hear you. You feel weird about money. And yet I want you, as somebody who cares about impact, who cares about mission, if I want somebody to be making more money, I want it to be you all. Like, I want it to be the people who are already values and mission centric. And so we have some folks in our community. I was just looking, only about a third of our members work exclusively with nonprofits. Now that could include, education, government. So it depends on how folks are categorizing that. But still, like, some people are working with other small businesses. Some people are doing important DEI and inclusion work with corporations. If you're bringing your values and you're leading, you're creating the website for some big corporation, but you're doing that values first, accessibility first, all of that. Like, I'd rather have you all there than somebody who really is only profit driven, and have you be able to make a living while you're still doing that good work at these places that aren't inherently going to prioritize that unless they're maybe working with someone like you. So I don't think it is. And I also understand kind of feeling that push pull when you're not working with organizations that, like, maybe you have to fight a little bit to actually get some of those other values incorporated in the work you're doing. So some of it depends on whether or not you have the capacity and the energy to do that. But again, you all are the people that I would much rather have as the consultants inside those corporations that won't inherently center values in the way that I trust that folks that are a little bit more mission centered would.
So go ahead. No, please.
That begs the question of access, right? And I think, I don't think in the space that I work in, I don't think anyone's opposed to kind of branching into these other areas. People just don't know where to start, right? I think especially if a lot of them have their networks and their backgrounds in the nonprofit sector, that's who they're going to go to for their referrals. And it's just, it feels overwhelming and even hard to even know how to break into those areas. So that's a question I would love to ask the audience too. Like, if you've managed to cross those borders, how did you initially take those first steps, or what would you suggest to other people in the audience who are interested, in not just participating in nonprofit work exclusively, who might not have the networks, who might not have whatever is required to do that, or even the internal, I don't like imposter syndrome, but like the internal limiting beliefs, right? That would even allow them to think that they would be kind of successful, in those spaces, in a new space. So I think for me, and my perception of that is, it's a matter of access and understanding of where to go and how to even tap into those areas.
So I want to reiterate your call, Kamilah, because I think this is definitely one that I would like to bring someone up to speak about. So if you have straddled that line or jumped the line, right, to go from nonprofit to private sector or to government, and you brought, to Lauren's point, those values with you, if you had to advocate or fight for certain line items or contractual obligations, like how how did you make that happen? And is there an experience or lesson that we can bring out to share with other folks that are maybe wrestling with the data and with, you know, the folks that they serve as part of their clients?
My name is Jeff. I'd be happy to share, not that this is the right approach, but at least what we did. So we're actually a design and innovation consulting firm, and we started in the private sector, but because everything or the methodology that we believe in is human-centered, it really pairs well with social impact work, or just in general. So we actually started with mid to large size organizations, moved into the Fortune 500s. And then from there, we actually started the social impact piece by more of a give back, because we saw the needs that they had from an organizational standpoint, and said, okay, we really have this opportunity to be at a crossroads. That's a really cool place to be, because we can give them Fortune 500 strategies to a 5-person nonprofit. And so we started kind of positioning ourselves in that way. Now, not all of our engagements are pro bono at this point with nonprofits, but then it's just led to partnering with individual consultants that come onto our team and become white labeled through our brand, that we can go into different sectors. So not only do we do social impact, we do public work. We also do a lot in the educational space about rethinking education and what does school design look like. So I think finding those pillars of people from a consultant standpoint that makes sense to partner, and I would say date a little bit, has helped us grow into different markets or emerging markets. So again, not that it's the right approach, it's just kind of how we landed there, and speaks a little bit to that question of how do you get into those different markets.
I appreciate you sharing that, Jeff. I think that's valuable input. And one of the things that you bring up is something that I have seen work a lot when folks are trying to make the jump into government, at least, which is those partnerships and the subcontracting opportunities, and really building up those case studies to say, hey, I've done this work over there, and then I did it over here, maybe with someone else, but now I can lead this work, for myself or with someone in partnership with someone else. I think that's definitely one of the most valuable ways that you can probably do that, is just bring in that expertise and say, we did this over here, and the team is relevant to you or related to you in some way, as is the expertise, and we can make the same offering, whether it's for small or large organizations. So thank you for sharing that. I think slightly related to this, and slightly related to breaking into new sectors and meeting new people. We are going to talk about RFPs, but I want to talk about something fun first. And that is LinkedIn. So I know, Lauren, I know you're on LinkedIn. I see your posts. Kamilah, I see you're on LinkedIn. I see your posts. And everyone here, I think I've read at least one of your posts on LinkedIn, if not multiple of them. Over 80% of the consultants that we surveyed report using LinkedIn to stay up to date about current trends. That's not even to mention how it's used as a networking tool, as a relationship tool, and as a marketing tool for your business. So my question to both of you, if you're not using LinkedIn already, are you missing out?
Yeah. I mean, I would say get on it. Get on the game, because so I've been on LinkedIn, I really think since the beginning of time, since LinkedIn was around, but I really started getting active in the last 3 years since I started my independent consulting journey. And that all of the work that I've done so far, I mean, I can say all of it. A lot of the work that I've done so far has come out of relationships that I've made on that silly platform, honestly. Alfredo, I think I met you on LinkedIn. Lauren, I think I met you potentially through LinkedIn or through a connection that we had on LinkedIn. It really is a gold mine. I know it's scary, and it's hard to sort of find kind of what lane you want to play on the platform. But it really is a powerful tool for inbound leads. I really do think so. Like, once you're able to sort of build your brand to a level where you can be recognized as someone who knows a little something about a little something, and you're kind of in top of mind, folks start to reach out to you. And that does take a little bit of time and consistency. But I mean, I'm a huge fan of the platform. It's brought money in the door. It's brought partnerships. It's helped us grow our community. It's my primary marketing outlet that I use as a discovery platform, which I then sort of funnel into an email list and sort of nurture relationships that way. That's the strategy that I'm working this year, which I was never really serious about my email list, but LinkedIn is sort of the place that I start to kind of get people to know who I am and what I talk about in my experiences and what I can offer. And then I sort of nurture that in the direct messages and then offline and not offline, but in email. So yeah, they need to hire me because I'm only talking about LinkedIn. And
I'm gonna take this like this 30-second, this 2-minute clip and just send it to LinkedIn.
you know,
and
if
to
you have a
my
connection, speak my name in rooms, man, because it's I think it's a valuable tool, and I really think a lot of people are scared of it, and so it's an underutilized tool because people feel like they have to show up a certain way. And I think what's worked for me is throwing out all of those supposed tos and just being very comfortable with showing up the way I talk now and the way, you know, that I'm meeting people in person. And it's really worked for me.
Yeah, I like the throwing out the supposed to, because I really like LinkedIn. I enjoy being able to make connections, seeing what other people are posting. Yeah, I think I found our mutual connection, Kamilah, through LinkedIn. And I think especially for nonprofit consulting, like it's a nice place where you do have a lot of people who are sharing. That said, when last November, when we actually launched like the paid membership with Consultants for Good, I started doing it full time. I was talking to the woman who now manages our LinkedIn, and she asked for our strategy. And that was, well, when I have something I think that is interesting or unique, I post it and then I reshare it on the Consultants for Good page. And she kind of looked at me like, please tell me that is not your strategy. And I was like, well, it's what I do. It's not a strategy. It is just the thing that I do. And so being able to keep up with it, coming up with newer relevant content, especially for our company page, sure, posting things with like the things that I'm noticing or sharing kind of more personally, that feels okay to do on my own. But on the company page, I wanted to have a little bit more of a consistent, effective presence, tagging members and things like that. And I'm really bad at that stuff. And so one, I think if you think you're supposed to do LinkedIn, but you absolutely hate it, find what works for you. Like you run your own business. You don't have to do anything you don't want to, especially if that thing isn't necessarily working for you. If you're posting things and you don't like doing it and it's not that effective for you, throw it out the window for a little while. That's fine. Or you can hire somebody like I'm now doing to actually manage all the LinkedIn posts. Like she's brilliant. She's thoughtful about it. She comes up with the content like 5 times faster than I ever would. And then I get to reshare that and say some things with my own voice. But that's the part that I'm good at and like. I really don't like doing the rest of that. So I think I love the personal relationship piece, the making connections piece, but the pressure to post consistently and always say something new and interesting, again, I'm really awful at that. And so I either wasn't doing it or now I'm lucky enough to be able to have somebody else doing it.
So Lauren, it sounds like so LinkedIn company page and personal page for you then.
Yes.
Kamilah, you?
Yeah, I have both, but I don't do anything with the company page. It's turning into just a personal brand. I sort of just reshare on the company page what we share. So, and I don't have a strategy either. I tell people all the time, like my LinkedIn strategy is I have a random idea as I'm driving or as I'm walking somewhere. I'll make a draft, like a draft bulleted in a Gmail draft. And then when I say I want to post something on LinkedIn today, I'll go look through my drafts and see like what resonates with me in that moment or what's timely, and then I'll develop it out. So it's like I have things in my mind like literally all the time. And I think as entrepreneurs, you probably all feel some version of that, like ideas and thoughts and reactions to what's happening in the world. And instead of just going straight to LinkedIn, I'll go to a Gmail draft and just sort of I subject lined it LI. And in the body of the draft, I'll just type my ideas. And then when it feels right, I'll come back to it. So your social media person, Lauren, would also be mortified probably to know that that's my strategy. But honestly, that's what makes it fun for me because I don't put pressure on myself to do, again, the supposed to's, what everyone's telling me, how I'm supposed to show up. It feels just very natural to me. If I'm like, I haven't said anything in a while, like I'm sure I have something interesting in here. and then, that's what it'll be. Unless, of course, like we have a launch or something that we're trying to plan around, then we'll actually be a little bit more thoughtful around, kind of the communications that we're putting out around that. But and I think your point, Lauren, like put an asterisk next to that. Like if LinkedIn doesn't feel good to you, please don't do it. Like find something that feels authentic. Like you can do a blog, you can do podcasts, you can, record yourself having meetings with people, just talking about whatever, and share those things. Like as long as you're sharing your thoughts and your experiences in some way, and positioning yourself kind of as knowledgeable about some specific thing, try that and experiment that. And if it doesn't feel right, then maybe move on to something else. And I'll also say the importance of really not utilizing LinkedIn as the first and only stop. We all know relationship development takes time. So people might discover you, they might be lurking in the background for a year, and then out of the blue, you'll post something and you'll get a DM saying, hey, so my area of specialization is interim executive leadership. So when someone resigns or gets fired, like I swoop in and sort of help stabilize things until the permanent person is hired. And someone will reach out to me just saying, oh, I remember you posted something like that. I recall that you do something like this. Do you want to have a talk? So it's really just a matter of staying in people's minds and figuring out what platform and modality is best for you.
I think one thing I'll add to what both of you have shared is if you're not sure, like there's plenty of guest opportunities, right? Like y'all are a guest on here. Lauren, I've been a guest on MC4G a few times. Like this is not the last time that like we'll probably be a guest in each other's communities. And if you're figuring that out, like reach out and offer yourself to either write a post or co-write a post or a blog or speak with somebody that does this regularly, right? Especially in the nonprofit consulting community. There's like a million podcasts, there's a million avenues to share. If you go on each one of our phones and our computers for everyone that's on here, I'm sure you'll hit every single channel and medium that's available. And so if that's something that you're just also figuring out, like try it out and don't feel right. Don't like forget the supposed to's of choose a platform. Like just go try something out and see what you like and see what works.
Something else I'll share too that we have now on Consultants for Good. If you don't want to do your own LinkedIn posts, if you write articles or share videos or share your offerings on your profile, we'll just share them for you. We'll put them in the newsletter, we'll put them on LinkedIn, we'll tag you, and then you can just repost it. You don't even have to add anything new to it. So that's kind of a nice way to help get the word out there, and we'll just do it on your behalf and take one more thing if like the article writing or video sharing is more your speed.
That's actually a really good service. I like that. I like that a lot. And you get the happy notification later of like you've been
exactly.
Perfect. I promise I'll close with something fun, but I got to talk about RFPs and how little people like them, yet people use them a ton. And so this is something I want to share, that there's a bit of a dichotomy of where in the consulting and small business community, right, we saw I think the survey reported 72% of people responded to an RFP last year. Most people, about 51%, if I recall, were either somewhat or very dissatisfied with the RFP win rates, but they were mostly satisfied with how their services matched the offering or their services requested in the RFP. There's another company called Loopio that's done this for about 5 years now, where they've done a similar survey, much more focused on RFPs. And they were working mostly with large businesses, but their survey showed similar win rates, but just bigger contract values, more RFPs applied to, and a greater appetite for RFPs. And I think that just underscores kind of this, a lot of things that you all have brought up before, right? Capacity, overhead, who's in those conversations and who has the ability to manage those relationships. But I want to just start talking about RFPs in general, and what you see the conversations in your communities, because I have seen those, those listserv conversations, the Slack conversations, how folks in your communities react and talk about RFPs when they come up.
I'm happy to start. General consensus in the community that I serve is folks are opting out. And I think they've been burned by them. And I think that's potentially going to continue to, broaden the equity gap and the revenue gap, sadly. But I think a lot of people are opting out of, again, the culture of work in general, like that, how we're going after it and what we're seeing as success. I would say, again, anecdotally, probably about like 90 to 95%. And we're a community of about 75 at this point. Again, Black women and women of color consultants, and they just don't feel like they're given a chance unless they have a warm introduction, unless they have a relationship with someone there already. People are not going after, they're choosing to just, again, self-select and not go after these blind cold RFPs. And I'm kind of in that camp as well. I'm about 3 years into the consulting world, so I'm still fairly new. All of mine have come from referrals, every single one. I've gone after several RFPs. The largest one was probably 250, 300,000. Didn't get any of them. I've partnered with other people in our community for RFPs to make us a more robust, in my viewpoint, like a more robust, candidate, I guess, for lack of a better word. And still, so I mean, I scratch my head around who are getting the RFPs, how are they getting it? But the consensus in the community that I work with is folks aren't interested in them unless they have a warm lead or a warm relationship.
Lauren, I'm curious about what you're doing there. I couldn't see 4G.
Ours is pretty similar. Anytime questions about like RFP processes as a whole come up in any of our private forums, there's one guy, and I'll say that because he's actually helping lead a session on RFPs with
I know exactly what you're talking
Alfredo.
about too, and we
Yep.
talk to you regularly too.
And he loves them, and he will help anybody who wants with them. Like, he's got a template, he knows the tricks, and hearing him talk about what those tricks look like, it's also kind of the it feels like the old handwritten thank you note etiquette of job interviews is for RFPs now. So like, do these things, list it just this way. That'll never be in your instructions, but this is how you do it. And so there's just such a clear lack of access, lack of equity. If you don't have an Adam telling you that this is how to do it, how do you really get into that space? And if you don't have somebody who is great at them, likes them on your team, where that's almost their full-time job, just applying to these RFPs, like Kamilah, I've never won an RFP. Mine were all relationship based when I was doing more consulting work. That said, we've got a lot of folks kind of on the one side also saying, here's what I wish this process looked like instead. And so that's what I'm trying to learn more about, not only just based on consultants' preferences for the process they'd like, but also for equity and access, because relying on just referrals is also super inequitable because groups tend to be pretty homogenous by identity, who has more access, who's more well networked, who has more free time to sit on a board. And so then that ends up mirroring like the nonprofit sector of white women who have access and also access to wealth and other networking. And so what does something in between those look like that's still relationship based and personal, but isn't only relying on kind of the who you know, where all these RFPs are going out and often still going to folks that were almost predetermined or who were already connected or were already in those networks. And it's not taking so much time. I mean, RFPs take a ton of time. If you've got somebody who's good at it and likes doing it, fantastic. If you don't, how can you be expected to actually use RFPs to figure out business? So I'd be curious too to hear from folks either off mute or in the chat, like what would your ideal business development process look like, especially if that's somewhere in between RFPs and just direct referrals?
And I want to follow up with each of you on different points that you brought, but Lauren, you actually, I think you bring up something very important there, right? Where it can't, like, even if you can opt out, that is the luxury of being a business owner, right? Of being your own boss and saying like, I don't do these things. And RFPs can be one of them, just like LinkedIn can be one of them, or, anything else can be one of them. But then that also comes out to, your definition of success and your North Star. And if, I think we've seen a clear indicator, at least at Prosal, that RFPs are a stepping stone to scaling. And if an exit or a 7-8 figure business is something that is on your mind, then RFPs are likely something that's going to have to cross. You're going to have to cross that bridge at some point. But for you, so Lauren, for you, what I want to ask is, because you brought this up as it relates to Adam, what what can we do as a community, and as individual consultants to prepare more for the RFP process, or at least be a little more educated about, what are the tools available for us?
Yeah. I mean, I've never won an RFP. So basically what we're offering usually, and I know Prosal offers, and I know Catalyst has offered, is we'll bring in folks who are good at RFPs, who understand that space. And so we've got an RFP series starting in June. The first session's totally free, specifically to talk about RFPs. I think you can also partner with more experienced consultants who are great at getting RFPs, and whether it's a project that's bigger than you would normally be able to do, there's some things in the project out of scope, or just you wanting to get experience with both the RFP process and being in these bigger projects that tend to be associated with RFPs. You can look for, like, we'll have folks post all the time, hey, I'm going to apply for this RFP. I can offer this to it. Will somebody join in on this? I mean, that also just shares the work of the actual pulling the proposal together. And this is kind of related, but I also think if you're seeing RFPs that are posted, whether they have too low of a budget, no budget, whether the scope doesn't make any sense for the work that you're doing, and I'll kind of speak for both Alfredo and Kamilah here too, like, reach out to folks like us that don't have a stake in it, because we can reach out to those organizations and say, provide some feedback on your behalf. But if I provide that feedback, I'm not also then applying for that project. So kind of going both ways, both how do we support consultants to feel ready and feel prepared when you're applying for RFPs, maybe in partnership, maybe by yourself, but also the organizations issuing them, sometimes they just think that's what they're supposed to do, and they really do need some guidance and support and are quite open to it. And so, like, reach out to folks that can be advocates for more equitable, better scopes, clearer processes, because we're in some ways a better position to do that on your behalf.
I have a literal copy paste snippet that I have built into HubSpot. When someone asks me, why do you want me to share a budget in my RFP? And it is a direct just message I sent to everyone with a link to multiple articles, some of which that we have written. It's like, this is why it's important to share your budget in the RFP, in addition to like so many other things. But like, that's the one, and that's the hill that I die on, right? And Kamilah, this is my question to you, because we talked about this before, is that what can we do for us individually, right? Like you and I and Lauren as leaders of our communities, but what can we also do as consultants, and folks actually do this work to advocate for the things that we don't want in an RFP, right? Those unclear scopes, those budgets that are not existent, the 1 week to deliver timeline, or a timeline that's like, hey, do this thing, and I don't know what I want to do, but I want to do ASAP, and I'm not going to tell you how much I can pay, and I'm not going to tell you anything about what we've done in the past. Like, what are the things that we can do, and how can we frame that so that other people benefit, not just us?
I mean, I think the first thing is talk about it. In the community, whatever communities you're in. Like, I'm in, I think, 3 nonprofit consulting communities right now, and this is a topic of conversation in every single one of them: RFPs and the process and ways to make it better. And I think being transparent about what you're seeing, what you don't like, what you want to see, so that it implants sort of ideas into other people's minds about ways that they could perhaps, engage when those things come across their desk. And the soapbox that I'm on, going back to the whole LinkedIn thing, is like, so my first viral post, my first and only ever viral post on LinkedIn last year was about RFPs and how just generally they suck, right? And I listed out sort of very specific reasons that they tend to not work for us, for the smaller agencies, or solopreneurs or independent consultants. And I proposed some additional ideas around ways that it can be done a little bit more smoothly and a little bit less onerously. And the most fascinating thing that came out of that was that organizations reached out to me to say, can you look at our RFP and basically make it easier? Like, they want their lives to be easier too. And I think a lot of people, Lauren, like you were saying, get stuck in the supposed to. I think that can be the theme of today, because, and I think as humans, we do that. And I think you have to just disrupt, like, why am I doing it this way? My budget for this project is $30,000. Why am I making my staff take out, weeks of their time to draft all these things and come up with all this stuff and have multiple levels of interviews and conversations? And that's just not necessary. And I think calling that out and bringing it to light is probably one of the easiest things we can do, particularly if you don't have skin in the game where it's something you're actually going after. But just being vocal about your experience and you know why these are things you're not choosing to go after, and how that means they're missing out on potentially, you know, highly qualified talent that they might not otherwise have access to because they're so hell-bent on, you know, their processes and things like that. There's some people you're never going to sway. When you're working in government, they have very specific, you know, bureaucracy that they have to follow. So it's a completely different conversation. But like I said, when you're dealing with like a $35,000, you know, do my communications plan, like, you know, an onerous RFP process just is not necessary. And sometimes you just have to call them out. I wish I had the link to that viral thing, because what was also really cool was the comments that all the other consultants were making with their suggestions. It was just really fascinating to see A, how it resonated with so many people, and B, the options that people were proposing as alternative ways of doing business. So I'm going to try and find that in the 5 minutes that we have, because I think
And then if not, we can also send it in the email after.
okay, I'll do that then.
I want to ensure that we also reward the other side of this coin. And this is something that I at least regularly do, which is when I do see an RFP and I see something that one that's written well or a process that's conducted well, it's congratulate them and say, hey, you did something good here. Like, it's unfortunate that that's where the bar is, right? But like, hey, you put a budget in here. Hey, you're giving folks 2 weeks to submit. You're being clear about all these things. You're taking meetings. You know how many times I've sent an email and a question to an RFP and I get an out of office for the day that they're supposed to come back. Like literally, actually, I saw one for Procter and Gamble, right? Like you'd think that this is even better, like at the Fortune 500 level, but like no, it's the same deal, you know. So don't feel like we're getting the bottom rung of the treatment just because this is nonprofit consulting. This is like everything in RFP world. But you know, to that same effect, advocate for the things that you see being done well, like in any other space. So folks know what you like, what we all like, and what we don't like. I know we have 5 minutes left. I'm really happy. I think everyone in the chat has been very communicative, and helpful in sharing their experiences. I do want to close with something a little more open and not necessarily related to the survey that we discussed, but getting more to the roots of consulting. And this is a conversation that we had. We were talking about this session, which is, what is the goal of a consultant, right? Like in running their business, if that is to exit, if that is to support their lifestyle, if that's to work with people that they want to work with, if it's to have autonomous and complete work-life liberty. So I'm curious about you all, and I want to see if this inspires anyone in the chat as well, or in the audience. For the both of you, I want this to be the closing question. And Kamilah, I'll start with you. What motivated you to start Catalyst Consulting and the Catalyst community?
I would say with the particular group that I work with, it was about freedom and liberation, and, you know, allowing people to define what that meant for themselves. And for those who wanted to dip their toe into trying a different way of existing and a different way of working, to know that they had a supportive place to do that. And so the community was actually born out of my resignation in 2020, part of the Great Resignation, for various reasons. I fell into consulting. So it was never a plan. I had no 5-year plan. I had no, like, this is my strategy. It was sort of, you know, I knew I needed out from what I was in. And I think a lot of the women who find themselves to our community, it's a very similar story. They're burnt out. They, you know, have experienced toxic work environments. They've experienced racist work environments, which is inherently toxic. They've, their parents, their moms, and want more time with their families and their kids, and wanted to have choice around who they said yes and no to, and make sure that folks are values aligned. So that, again, I think might lead to some of the survey results, particularly with that population of, you know, people that I mentioned that I was most interested in. There's a lot of lifestyle stuff built into why they choose consulting. So that might actually be why they're not going after some of the things that are higher ticket. So for me, it was autonomy. And in the survey that we just released, the 2-year impact survey, we asked that question, why? And 97, I think, % of the women who responded said autonomy. They wanted more flexibility and freedom. So that's their guiding light in all of the work that they're doing.
I can see that resonance clearly carried over to the community that you built. So congratulations to that. Lauren, what about you? How did C4 why did C4G emerge out of that coffee shop and turn into what it is today?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'll say, which is working a little bit backwards because it's just so similar to what Kamilah shared, like lifestyle, autonomy, and freedom. Every time we ask, what's your favorite part about being a consultant? Those are the same words that show up in our community too. So it sounds like there's some similarity in that space. And I think that the folks that are really seeking community tend to be people who want a little bit more of that sense, more than it is to grow some sort of big business empire. There's other kinds of entrepreneur resources for that sort of company typically. I mean, I started Consultants for Good because it was exactly what I needed, and there wasn't anything like it in Denver at the time. You know, it was pre-pandemic, 6 years ago, so things weren't super virtual yet. I was in a group in Wisconsin that was somewhat similar. It focused on consultants, but it was open to others. And then I came to Denver, and all of my mentors, as I started my business, were over the phone. And I really wanted a place where I could ask basically, what are the stupid business questions that I feel embarrassed not to know, even though, of course, I don't know, and other people maybe have answers for it. I found a lot of the kind of entrepreneur startup meetups were a lot of real estate business cards, felt more like singles meetups or like how to trick people, how to be on your email list. And like that was just so unaligned. And the clients are different. Like when you work with nonprofits and mission driven businesses, it's just different. Like that group doesn't like to be sold to. And so what is that relational way that you can actually grow your business in a way that feels really values aligned first and foremost? And I think that's kind of what it's become. I mean, I ended up with a full-time job in the midst of my consulting, and to be able to grow Consultants for Good. I mean, at this point, these are my favorite humans to work with, working with people who I don't have to convince them to care. That comes pretty naturally. But I think that there's also kind of that financial money struggle, how to get comfortable with charging your worth, asking for more, getting rid of the supposed tos because you have the freedom to do so. And that can be really tough if you came out of toxic work environments where you didn't have that much control, but now want the autonomy to set up your life how you want, set up your work how you want, work the days you want to. And so being able to like actually reshape what your entire career and life look like, it's really exciting. And so it's really fun to work alongside folks that care, that have kind of taken their career into their own hands. Yeah, it's an inspiring group of people to get to work with every day too.
I love it. Thank you both. I know we're at time, so Kamilah and Lauren, thank you so much. I can definitely see that the conversation resonated with a lot of folks in the chat. Before everyone starts dropping off, there is a survey at the end you're going to be redirected to. Please take it. It's going to ask us all how we did and what we can do better as panelists, as presenters, and in the overall survey information that we presented. So would love to hear that. I would love to share that feedback with Lauren and Kamilah as well. But Lauren, Kamilah, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing everything that you did today and for being so open and vulnerable with everything you shared. Thank you for everyone that attended. These conversations really are made possible by you all. And so any and all feedback and thoughts that you all share are always welcome. We're going to continue having more of these and having these discussions. So if you're not already part of Prosal and C4G and Catalyst, check them out. The links are in the chat. You're going to get an email with the recording of this event and everything that we talked about later tomorrow. And have a wonderful rest of your week and a wonderful long weekend. I always forget that. This is one of the worst things about being a business owner. You forget the long weekends, but like it's a long weekend. Enjoy it. Go travel, go have fun, and wish you all an awesome and wonderful time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye all.
Bye.